Hey everyone, and welcome to Vlogmas Day 3. As you can probably already tell by the title of this video, I'm going to be doing my November wrap up. I feel like I'm a little bit more excited about this wrap up because I'm doing it during Vlogmas. But other than that, it's really just a typical wrap up video, and I have 5 books to talk about for the month of November. And I will say this reading month was not really my best, not really in terms of like how many books I read. Like, I am a little bit bummed that I only read 5 books. I was hoping to read a little bit more, but it just really didn't work out that way. And I ended up reading 2 books that I didn't really like, and I feel like those kind of put me into a little bit of a mini slump. But like I said, I read 5 books. It's not that bad, and I would say that most of the books that I read hovered around the like 400 page mark, so I feel like that's probably also why I ended up reading less this month than I would have expected to. But anyway, without further ado, let's get right on in to the books that I read in November. So I started off the month with reading Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year. I was so excited. I ended up being gifted a copy from one of my very good friends, Jenny, so thank you, Jenny, for that. And I believe I started it at the beginning of the month, or maybe at the end of October. I can't really remember when I started it, but I just found that I had a really hard time getting into this book in the first place. I believe that I read the first like chapter or so of this book at least 3-4 times. I don't know what was going on, if like I just like could not understand who was speaking, like what perspective I was supposed to be following, who was who. I felt like there was a lot of characters that I was just kind of like being thrown into their lives, and I just could not parse what was going on. I have to say that in terms of like Sally Rooney books, I don't really feel like that's the case for me typically. Like, I personally absolutely love her books. Conversations with Friends wasn't like my all-time favorite book, but I did enjoy it. Normal People, one of my all-time favorite books. Beautiful World, Where Are You, one of my all-time favorite books. So I just, you know, going into Intermezzo, I was so shocked that I was confused and like I didn't know what was going on. I kept thinking it was me, but then I would just like keep reading the beginning of this book and I'm like, this, it's not necessarily like incoherent, it's just very muddled. And honestly, that set me off really on the wrong foot when getting into this book. Basically, Intermezzo is about these 2 brothers, and they have just recently lost their father, whom they both kind of had very different and separate relationships with. The older brother didn't really feel connected to his father, and then the younger brother felt really connected to his father. And they just ended up kind of growing up very differently. And they both have very like different outlooks on life and different experiences and different perspectives. And really this book just explores the relationship between these 2 brothers, their experiences with grief, how grief has affected their lives going, you know, after their father's death, and just like a lot of like the little interpersonal relationships that they have in their lives. And that entire setup sounds like something that I would absolutely love. Unfortunately, it just ended up not working for me, and I did bring this up in the first day of Vlogmas, which is like basically an amalgamation of a bunch of different clips that I had taken throughout the month of November, where I talk about Intermezzo in the very beginning. And I basically was like, I watched this movie called His 3 Daughters. It's on Netflix. And it kind of explores a very similar plot that Intermezzo does. And I just felt like His 3 Daughters did a much better job at exploring grief and kind of like going through the different relationships that these sisters had, not only with their father, but also with each other, and just how different of people each of them is. And I just felt like that movie did a much better job than Intermezzo did, which is so surprising because I love Sally Rooney. I love her writing. I think that the writing in Intermezzo was really strong, and it definitely had a lot of the same elements that typical Sally Rooney books have. So the formula was there. I should have loved this book, and I just could never truly like connect to it. I always felt like I was on the outside of this book. It's almost like when you're in a conversation with people and they have an inside joke and you're on the outside and you have no idea what's going on. That's how I feel. It almost like it was like a you had to be there kind of book. And I wasn't there. I was never there. So it's just, it never fully connected with me as a reader and as somebody who loves Sally Rooney's writing. And typically I feel very much let in on these characters. And I don't know if it's just because like most of her main characters, or at least like in each of her books, there is like a very strong female main character. That could be the issue that I'm having. And I just felt like these two male main characters I could not connect with on any sort of level. Like there were moments, there were flashes of like, oh, I think I'm starting to understand this character. Oh, I think I'm starting to like really connect with this character. And then it would just kind of fizzle out and I could never really recapture that feeling. As somebody who's been reading basically their entire life, I have always felt while reading like I just don't really typically connect with allo cishet male main characters. There are definitely exceptions. Like I love A Study in Charlotte. Love those books. One of my favorite series of all time. And it follows the character Jamie. So, and there's like maybe a few other exceptions, but typically I would say like 80% of the time, maybe even 90% of the time, I just will not connect with a book that has a majority of the characters that are allo cishet men. And as much as I could like see where these characters are coming from and I understood their motivations, I understood like the things that they had gone through, I just could not connect. So unfortunately I did end up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars. I do talk about it more, like I said, in the first day of Vlogmas. So if you want to go see my more like really in-depth thoughts on this book and kind of more like my immediate thoughts on the book, definitely go watch that video. But yeah, this one was kind of a big bummer. I know it's like 3 out of 5 stars, so it's like not a terrible rating. I didn't hate this book by any means. It just wasn't the most pleasant reading experience. The next book that I read in November was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, and I absolutely loved this book. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars, and basically if you've never heard about this book, I've been hearing about it for years and I've been meaning to read it for years. I just kept thinking it wasn't going to be like a book for me. I just didn't think I was going to like it because it is like a cozy fantasy, and cozy fantasies can kind of go like either way for me. Sometimes I really like them. Sometimes I just find them to be a little bit cringe. But this one I ended up really enjoying, and I feel like if you are a fan of The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk, you are going to absolutely love this book because it has like a very similar feeling to it, and both are kind of set in like a fantasy Regency era. But when it comes to Half a Soul, this book follows the main character Dora, and when she was a little girl, she ended up coming face to face with a fae, and they ended up taking half of her soul, basically. It's exactly what the title says it is. And she lives and is human and is, you know, fine on the outside, but on the inside it kind of feels like something is missing. She can't really fully express or feel emotions, so she kind of goes through her life coming off as very uncanny to a lot of people and very unsettling. And it was really interesting to see this world from her perspective. I really loved, you know, just getting to be inside of her head and seeing the way that she interacted with the world. And this book has like one of my new favorite romances of all time. I loved it so much. I love the love interest. He is incredible. And I love the main character. I just think that they work really well together, and I love their first meeting. And there's just so many things about this book that I'm just like, I love it so much. And this is one of those books that is so compulsively readable and so enjoyable to read that I could totally see myself picking up this book in the future and rereading it and having those same emotions all over again. So I really, really loved this book. I thought it was really well written. I think that there were just like a few things that I didn't absolutely love. Mainly the ending, I felt like kind of wrapped up a little bit fast for my liking. I do tend to like an ending where I can kind of sit in it for a while, if that makes any sense. And then I also didn't really like the added novella at the end. I thought that that was kind of unnecessary and it didn't really hold my attention. So that's mainly why this book ended up getting 4 out of 5 stars. I just felt like, you know, the actual ending was too rushed, and then the novella at the end was just like, I didn't really care. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this book. Like I said, I think if you are a fan of The Midnight Bargain, which you should be, it's one of my favorite books of all time, you're gonna really like this book. Also maybe like The Beautiful Ones by Sylvia Romano Garcia, another really great book. And funny enough, they're all green. All of these books have a green cover, which I think is absolutely phenomenal and very iconic. So if you're reading a fantasy book with a green cover, it's probably going to be amazing. The next book is one that I have been trying not to talk about and trying to hold back because I have very strong emotions about it in a very, very negative way. And that is The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. I ended up actually rating this book a 1 star, which I have not done in a really long time, but I felt like it was so necessary that I had to do it. I don't even know where to begin with this book. This is kind of like another cozy fantasy book. I ended up picking it up because it was nominated for the Romantasy category in the Goodreads Choice Awards, and I was going through all of the nominations for basically every category, and I was like, wow, I really have not read a lot of like new releases this year. Like I've really been going into authors' backlists a lot, which is a lot of fun, but it means that like when it comes time for the Goodreads Choice Awards, I'm like, I haven't read any of these books. So I decided to pick up The Honey Witch because it was available on Libby, and I was just, I don't even know how to explain the emotions that I had when reading this book. Like I said, it's a cozy fantasy. It basically follows this young woman, and she has always kind of felt different, and she ends up finding out that she has these like honey witch powers, and she's going to follow in the footsteps of her grandmother, and they kind of end up going off to live in her cottage and doing all these like honey witch things. And the majority of the first half of the book is basically just like cozy fantasy. Not really a lot of plot, not really a lot of things going on. It's just sort of like day-to-day little cute honey witch activities and like nothing of real substance. It wasn't super like offensive to my taste, or, you know, I don't know, like it just like it wasn't a bad book at first. But you end up getting into this sapphic romance, which I was actually really excited about because as a bisexual person, I love a good sapphic romance. I think that that should be obvious, right? But, you know, in the beginning of this romance, I was like, okay, I could see it, it's fine. It's kind of like this, not really enemies to lovers, but sort of just like, they don't really like each other, but because of circumstances, they kind of always have to be close because, you know, they have a mutual friend, whatever. And you find out in the beginning of this book that honey witches, at least like this lineage of her family, cannot fall in love. If they fall in love, the other person will die or something bad will happen or whatever. And you kind of get told like in the beginning, the grandma has this guy that like kind of comes around a lot and he's really nice to her, and the granddaughter is like, so he's not in love with you? Like, what's going on here? And the grandma's like, oh no, he's not in love with me because if he was in love with me, he would die. Bad things would happen. It's not good. He's not in love with me. He's fine. And so you kind of get that set up pretty early on in the book, and you hear about it throughout the entire book. But once these two characters meet and end up forming like some sort of romantic feelings for each other, you would think that the main character would catch on that like, oh, we're falling in love with each other, like things are happening, like we are having, you know, this really strong connection. And so I should probably be really careful, but no, the main character does not think that way for some odd reason. I can't explain why, but you end up kind of finding out that her love interest, every time they're like together, or every time the love interest is feeling any sort of fond emotions towards the main character, she gets like really sick and has a really adverse reaction. But for some reason the main character is completely oblivious, even though she's literally being told that this is happening. The main character, for some reason, I don't understand what's going on in like the processes of her brain, but the main character is like, oh no, that girl like doesn't care about me. Like that girl doesn't have any actual like romantic feelings towards me. She doesn't love me, even though she's having these adverse reactions to her having feelings for, like, I don't know where the connection is being lost, but the main character truly is just like completely oblivious and completely in denial. I will say, spoilers for this book. I should have said that in the beginning, but spoilers. I am going to be talking about like in depth of this book. And the funny thing is that continually throughout, like during the middle and towards the end of the book, you see these two characters interacting with each other, and you see the ways in which the love interest is being affected by this curse. And the main character is very aware of it because she literally has to heal the love interest like a handful of times because of this curse. So you would think, you would put, like any normal rational person with a brain, with a working brain, would be able to put together, my love interest, every time that we kiss or hold hands or whatever, we're nice to each other, she ends up feeling sick or is like injured in some way or whatever, and I have to revive her every single time, like A plus B equals C. You would think that that would be kind of like common knowledge, like something that you would like just like immediately understand. Maybe not the first time, but definitely the second or third time, right? Especially if you're like very aware that this curse exists and you've been told by your grandma multiple times that like this curse is like a real thing and you are literally a honey witch, you have magical powers, and yet okay, anyway, there comes a point at around like the 80 to 85% mark of this book where these two characters are kind of like, fuck it, you know, we really like each other, whatever, we want to find like a loophole around this curse. And so they're in like their shared room or whatever, and they end up kind of like, it gets a little hot and heavy, and they end up being in the same room, pleasuring themselves but not each other. They're like, we can't do that because then like the curse, whatever. And so, okay, I get it, we all get it, that makes sense. Like, am I absolutely enjoying this book so far? Not really, but I'm along for the ride, why not? And so while they're doing that, in the throes of pleasure, the main character, as she like climaxes, and she's thinking about this the entire time, she's like in her brain, she's kind of like, I'm gonna say it, I'm gonna say I love her, I'm gonna say it, and she thinks about it multiple times. Like, this is not a like spur of the moment, I love you, you know, it's not like that. She literally is thinking about it the entire time, even before they start to engage in these like sexual things. The main character is like, I'm gonna tell her I love her, it's gonna be fine, nothing bad is gonna happen, you know, whatever. She doesn't love me, so nothing bad's gonna happen, which is like, how do you think she doesn't love you? She's clearly already been affected by the curse multiple times. Knock knock, is anybody home? Is anybody home? No, nobody's home. And so, like I said, as her climax happens, she tells her, I love you. And she finishes and she's like lying on the bed, like, you know, heavy breathing, whatever, and she's like, Lottie, because like she doesn't hear anything, like it's been dead silent for like a good minute, and she's like confused, she's like, what's going on, huh? And so she like sits up and looks over at Lottie, who's like the love interest, and Lottie is like basically dead. Like on the bed, dead, just dead. And the main character has the audacity to be shocked, the audacity to be confused. And I'm like, what's confusing? what's confusing about this? You know about the curse. You know that this is gonna happen. You knew it was gonna happen, but you deluded yourself into believing it wouldn't. And that really pissed me off. I wrote an entire review on Goodreads. I was very, very angry. I was genuinely, like, personally offended by this book, by the stupidity in this book. Like, I was personally offended on behalf of my intelligence, on behalf of the intelligence of, like, anybody reading this book. How do you get away with that? How do you get away with a character being so stupid? Like, I am the first one to go on, like, apologetics about main characters and their stupidity. I think that sometimes the whole, like, oh, this main character is stupid, they're making such bad choices, can be a little bit overblown. I'm not the first person to be like, this character's an idiot. But this book was so egregious in the main character's stupidity that I was just like, in good conscience, I could not rate it. Like, I had to rate it. I had to make sure that people see this and are like, how is this published? I'm actually, like, really angry. I'm like, there's so many better books, A, that aren't even published, and B, that are published and aren't nominated for a Goodreads Choice Award. How is this book popular? I'm genuinely concerned for the state of the current readership that we have right now, and, like, their lack of reading comprehension, their lack of critical thinking. How do you read this book and you're just okay with what the main character is doing? You're just yeah, oh wow, oh my gosh, like, I wouldn't have known that my love interest was going to die because I said I love her. Are you an idiot? Like, I'm just sorry, it's egregious. I'm sorry, I can't in good faith understand how people enjoyed this book. Like, I don't get it. Like, I'm gonna look at Goodreads right now. There's 12,865 ratings, 3,519 reviews. This book has a 3.61 average rating on Goodreads. That's insane. It should have, like, a 1.2 average rating. Like, I don't understand what people are liking about this, and B, how people can overlook the pure stupidity of the main character. Like, I don't understand. I don't want to keep talking about it because it's really pissing me off and it's really depressing me. Yikes. Stay away from this book. It's terrible. Like, truly, I hate saying that. I almost never say stay away from this book, it's bad. But I feel like when it comes to this book, it's necessary, and I'm doing a public good by saying to stay away from this book. I'm actually doing a public good. Someone should give me a medal. I'm just dead serious. I wish I was joking. I'm dead serious. Literally, I think any book that I would have read next probably would have gotten at least, like, a 3 or 4 star rating. I ended up reading Servant of Earth by Sarah Hawley, and I surprisingly really enjoyed this book. I have been really bummed out by the state of romantasy. It's bad. The majority of the books are bad, and the majority of the books are basically just, like, copy and pasted Sarah J Maas fanfic. You know what I mean? Like, it's nothing really interesting, it's nothing new or exciting, and as we've seen with The Honey Witch, even if it is something a little bit different, it's bad. But like I said, I ended up reading Servant of Earth, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I actually genuinely enjoyed this book, and I feel like if you're a fan of Holly Black, you might really enjoy it as well, because it kind of has the feel of, like, The Cruel Prince, but it also sort of has a feel of Uprooted, and I really enjoyed it because of those two things. And I thought that the writing was really solid as well, same with the world building and the characterization. This follows a human girl named Kenna, and she lives in a village where, I don't know if it's every year or every few years or whatever, but every once in a while a few girls get chosen to go to the Fae realm and live there, and they're kind of sold this idea that they're going to become, like, princesses or, like, you know, high court ladies or whatever. And so a lot of people want to go, but Kenna is like, I don't want to go, I don't trust these Fae people, like, I just get bad vibes, whatever. However, that year her friend gets chosen, and so Kenna decides to go with them in order to make sure that her friend is okay and like to kind of see what's going on. And they basically end up realizing that it's all really a trick, and most of the girls are going to die or become servants or slaves or whatever, and Kenna ends up making it out alive and is basically turned into a servant for, I believe, the Earth Court, I can't remember. And each of the different types of magic have like their own little courts within the Fae realm, and they basically have this sort of like Hunger Games-esque type of competition going on, where the younger heirs of each of the courts are sent to do certain tasks, and as long as they are able to complete each task, they get to live and they get to keep their magic and whatever. And so Kenna ends up going to one of the courts, and she becomes good friends with the, I guess you would say, victor from that specific court. I'm doing honestly a really bad job at describing this book, but it is kind of not really convoluted, but it is a little bit complex. Like I said, I think it, you know, I think with a lot of romantasy books, they do definitely draw from a lot of other fantasy books, if that makes sense. Like a lot of them kind of like share different ideas and things going on. So I know that that's not going to work for a lot of readers, and I totally understand that. Typically it doesn't work for me either, but I felt like this author at least did something a little bit different. And if you read the book, I think you might kind of understand where I'm coming from. I found this book to be really compelling. I really liked the main character. I thought that she was interesting, and even though she was, you know, not really super knowledgeable of the world around her, she didn't really make a lot of stupid decisions. She was actually really smart and really driven and really determined to survive in this Fae realm, so I really enjoyed that aspect of this book. And I also really enjoyed a lot of the friendship dynamics in this book. I thought that was really interesting. And even though this is kind of billed as a romantasy, I would say that the romance isn't a super big part of the plot, surprisingly. And even when it was, I actually really enjoyed the romance. I thought it was really interesting. There's a lot of like different, you know, court intrigue and political intrigue things at play, which made it really, really exciting. So I highly recommend Servant of Earth. I'm just realizing that, duh, she's the Servant of Earth. So she's in like the Earth Court. Duh. I don't know why that just like clicked in my brain. But yeah, highly recommend this book. If you're looking for a romantasy, I think you should pick this one up. And the very last book that I read in November is actually a reread, and that is And I Darken by Kirsten White. I ended up picking up this book to reread mainly because I felt like I was in a slump and I really wanted to get out of it. And I'd been meaning to reread this book for such a long time, but I just kept, you know, picking it up and being like, I don't know if it's the right time. I don't know if I'm ready to reread it. But it has been 7 years since I read this book. I actually read this book in November of 2017. So it's been exactly 7 years. And I just think that that's crazy. I can't believe that this book, this series, has been with me for nearly a decade. What? That's crazy. And I loved it so, so much. This is truly the pinnacle for me of like historical fiction and YA. I just think it's so good and so compelling and so intriguing. And even though it's written in a way that like I don't think I would typically enjoy, there is a lot of telling. There is a lot. It kind of reads almost like not really a history book, but it does read a little bit more academically and not really so much as like the typical YA writing style. I think it works. I think it works so well. It's very fresh. It's very different. And I absolutely love the main character of Lada. She is an icon and a legend, and she's so ruthless. But also like rereading this book, it really hit me how young she is and how human she is. And it's almost that much more heartbreaking reading it 7 years on, being 7 years older than I was when I first read it, and like really grappling with like the fact that this is a young girl in a world that is antagonistic to young girls. And oh, it really hits you. It hits you in such like a deep way. And I remember the first time I read this book, I listened to Reputation by Taylor Swift. And every time I listen to Reputation, I think of And I Darken. And this time I ended up listening to it as an audiobook, so I didn't really get to enjoy it while listening to Reputation, which is totally fine. But I just, it's so interesting to like read it separated from that album, because I feel like I have a different perspective on it when I'm not listening to that album. So I really love this book. It's fantastic. It's incredible. There's so many amazing parts of this book that I just love so much. And there's so many moments that just like, break my heart. So yeah, I don't know if I'm going to continue on with the series, but I think I want to. So we'll see what happens. Maybe in the new year, I will continue on with the series and reread the second and third books. But yeah, I loved it. If you've never picked it up, I highly recommend it. You hopefully will not be disappointed. Okay, so that was a really long wrap up. I don't know how I'm going to edit this entire thing. It ended up being 40 minutes long. I blame the Honey Witch. I blame the Honey Witch, that little bastard. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this wrap up, and I hope you guys are enjoying Vlogmas. I am really enjoying it. And if you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, TikTok, Goodreads, Storygraph. All the links are down below, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!